September 1927 was a dangerous time to keep money in a small town bank in the Dakotas. In just a few short months, robbers hit banks in South and North Dakota and even spilled over into Montana. Some of the jobs were crude, basically little more than safe smashing attempts. Others, though, were calculated daylight raids where tellers and cashiers faced the barrels of revolvers. And behind these stories were names that kept resurfacing: August Schumack, the Barge brothers, and their sometime partner, Richard Brumfield. Today, we're digging into a whirlwind of robberies, captures, and confessions that linked towns like Huron, Stratford, Verona, Wheelock, and Windermere into one violent chain of events. These are the types of robbery combines and gangsters we follow here on Decades of Gangsters from 1926 to 1941, when the U.S. enters World War II. So we'll begin in Huron, South Dakota. On June 8, 1927, the Farmers and Merchants Bank was robbed in broad daylight. The take was a pretty staggering $23,000, which is an enormous sum of money for someone back in 1927. Two men, Patrick Hanley and P.J. Driscoll, were then later hauled into court. Their jury sat on the case for about 19 hours or so before finding both of them guilty of robbery in the first degree. Alongside them, authorities had extradited another man, Roy Shea, from St. Paul, Minnesota. Shea was expected to face trial for a similar charge, but Hanley and Driscoll didn't have a lot of time to wait to find out what would happen next, because on September 10th, 1927, the two men began serving 15-year sentences at the state penitentiary in Sioux Falls. That was a big win for that area's law enforcement, but it was only the beginning of a September crime wave that would spread north across the Dakota border. So a few days later, another suspect came into the spotlight, and that was August Schumack. By September 16th, Schumack was sitting in the Brown County Jail in Aberdeen, South Dakota, while, quote, the web of evidence, end quote, around him began to tighten. Two witnesses from Stratford, South Dakota, swore that he matched the features of the man who robbed their local bank. One was an Arthur Sweltz, the cashier who stared directly into the robber's face, and the other, Oscar Stang, who said he'd spotted the bandit hiding in his cornfield the morning before the Stratford robbery. The very next day, Schumack was charged outright. Prosecutors tied him not only to the Stratford heist, but also to the Verona, North Dakota bank robbery. When he was searched, three $20 bills in his pocket matched those in terms of serial numbers with those taken in Verona. South Dakota's Attorney General considered handing him over to North Dakota, but Brown County's sheriff had other ideas. Schumack first had to face the courts in Aberdeen, South Dakota. He was also suspected in two area store heists, and Sheriff L.B. Geisler insisted that Schumack wouldn't be released anytime soon. Through it all, Schumack, quote, retained the same bold front, end quote, declaring his innocence. And speaking of the Verona robbery, let's step back and take a look at that itself. On September 6th, 1927, three unmasked men walked into the Farmer and Merchants Bank of Verona, North Dakota. It was broad daylight. They spoke broken English. They wore overalls under dark coats, and witnesses described them as, quote, short and dark, evidently foreigners, end quote, assumed to be either Greek or Mexican. Inside, they pulled guns on the cashier, the assistant cashier, and a patron. Quote, stick 'em up, end quote. They barked out, forcing all three onto the floor. Two robbers stood guard with their revolvers, while the third one went and locked the front door, pulled down the window curtain, and then began scooping up all the cash he could find. He cleared about $700 from the drawers or tills, then moved into the vault where the money sat in an open safe. When the robbers demanded, quote, "Where's the rest of the dough?" end quote, cashier L.R. Walden told them, quote, "We haven't got any," end quote. One of the robbers warned him not to get smart. After stuffing what they could into a bag, they ordered their captives into that vault and locked them inside. The trio made their getaway in a Buick taxi that they'd stolen the night before. And the escape itself sounded like something out of a motion picture. They ditched the taxi after running it over a riverbank near Glover, North Dakota, then scrambled into a waiting touring car with an accomplice inside at the wheel. The haul turned out to be nearly $3,000. That wasn't the first time that Verona had been hit. Just 7 months earlier, in February of 1927, cashier H.C. Bione had been murdered in another Verona bank raid, which is a story that we covered in the video Murder, Mayhem, Money. Now the little town of Verona had just faced its second terrifying encounter. So these bank robberies spread. The Verona robbery was only one of several to rock North Dakota that September. On September 8th, robbers blew open the vault of the State Bank of Bremen, but only managed to grab about $200 in silver from the tills. They tried explosives and even an acetylene torch to cut through the safe, but they failed. The town of Bremen had been robbed twice before in the last 6 years. Meanwhile, Attorney General George F. Schaefer publicly warned that North Dakota's banks were sitting ducks. Robbers could cut telephone wires, slip into town, and vanish in automobiles before lawmen even knew a crime had occurred. Schaefer urged small towns to post guards at the banks because, as he put it, bandits, quote, always survey banks before raiding and avoid those where they know they will meet opposition, end quote. And he was indeed right. Over the next 2 weeks, bank after bank came under attack. In Beaufort, North Dakota, robbers cut the telegraph line, tried to crack a screw safe, and then left a lineman dead on the tracks as he was searching for the cut in the wire and ended up electrocuting himself to death. Elson, North Dakota, $600 was stolen from the vault, but the torch-wielding yeggs failed somehow to cut through and open the safe. Wheelock, North Dakota. Robbers attempted to hit a Wheelock bank again, but abandoned their tools when something frightened them off. Manitou, North Dakota. This was a bank that had already been closed months earlier, but robbers still broke in, blew the safe open, yielding nothing but old bank records. And Windermere, North Dakota, where 2 unmasked bandits escaped in a blue Jewett touring car. It kind of comprised an epidemic of robberies across the state. Behind many of these crimes, authorities began to see familiar names. The Barge brothers, Lester and Donald, and their partner Clarence Reed, better known by his alias Richard Brumfield. By late September, the 3 were in custody near Kenmare, North Dakota. Sheriff A.R. Marshall and his deputies seized them along with pistols, 500 rounds of ammunition, nitroglycerin, dynamite caps, and stolen goods from Wheelock, North Dakota stores. Reed admitted to robbing banks across 4 states, North and South Dakota, Montana, and even Nebraska. And he added that he'd been dishonorably discharged from the Marines before turning to crime. Among the bank jobs he confessed to were Wheelock, Lignite, Northgate, Gascoigne, and Manitou, North Dakota, many of which we've covered previously. Also Glentana, Montana, Taylor, Hammett, and Sutton, Nebraska. Now, some of the robberies, like the Gascoigne heist, netted almost nothing. Reed even joked that they'd gotten just 10 cents, though prosecutors said the real take was $7 and a random piece of jewelry. Less funny was that Reed tied Lester Barge to multiple murders. Lester was already wanted in Minnesota for the killing of Marshal Frank Dahlin in Isanti, and in North Dakota for the murder of former bank cashier H.N. Peterson at Wheelock. We covered the Dahlin and Peterson murders and follow-up numerous times in the past. Not surprisingly, extradition requests poured in from Minnesota, Nebraska, and Montana. Meanwhile, federal officials eyed a stolen car from California the gang had driven across state lines, a violation of the Dyer Act. The so-called Barge gang was finally behind bars, but their trail of robberies showed just how widespread and dangerous that North and South Dakota and that whole upper Mountain West area had become. By the end of September 1927, North Dakota had seen robberies or attempted robberies in at least 7 different towns, and South Dakota had its share too. The amounts varied from a few $100s in silver to tens of thousands in cash, but the violence, the threats, and the brazen daylight attacks left little rural, isolated towns shaken. The stories of Schumack, the Barge brothers, and their partners were still unfolding, but one thing was clear. In the Dakotas of 1927, the fight between small-town banks and organized or even slightly disorganized gangs was far from over. Next Saturday, we bid September a fond farewell and head into October of 1927.